I forgot to record. So my phone. Yeah, and all the excitement, I forget to actually do my job. So I'm gonna actually go back and reshare. But anyway, so back to what you were saying, Mark. These are really, what from era are these from? These look like 50s, 60s stuff.
Uh-oh, I lost you guys. Post attendee. What do I do? Go back. Let me try to go back.
You lost us?
Yeah, it went to post attendee. Ah, thank God. Okay, we're good. Next slide, please.
Oh, okay. Now, before we go, what are these, like, 50s, 1950s, 60s?
Yes. These motors are pretty much 1950s. The plastic one, the red and white one, this plastic on the right-hand side, is probably 70s, early 70s. But I have a few more. I've since collected more. And everybody seems to really enjoy them, as they may have had one as a kid, or they, and I did, I had several. I managed to ruin the motors by submerging them, of course. And I never had a gas boat engine running. I never had one running because I'm just not into model boats.
Right. Interesting. Let's see here. There we go. So now you got to make.
So this collection is interesting in that it has been with me for well over 35 years. These are the original radios that I collected when I started collecting radios. And you can tell they're a little display worn. Although they've been clean, they still look dusty because they've been in that same spot for 3+ decades. But this is where I got my legs on collecting radio. You're going to see, I think it's an Atwater Kent that's on the top left. I think it's a BD, B/D in the middle. And the middle radio was an attempt to supply one dial radio to the masses. Now, I don't know if you remember the last meeting I spoke about 3 dials, which are TRS, tuned radio frequencies, and single dial radios, which are still tuned radio frequency, but now they've managed to couple the different tuning stages. There are between 3 and 4 condensers, tuning condensers, air capacitors, with a very, very elaborate shaft system interconnecting them. I'm sorry I cannot show the shafts, but we can get into that deeper if you have an interest in the changeover between battery sets and AC radios. I've kind of specialized a little bit in that regard. Now, the third radio down is a Bandmaster Senior. You ham guys will recall that. Some of you anyway. I think you're all old enough. And the Bandmaster Senior was a great way. They made the junior, the medium, and the senior. And they all had additional features, but looked pretty much the same. So I sold or traded my junior and my middle. I had all 3, and I kept the Bandmaster Senior. What a beautiful transmitter this thing is. I think it's about 25 watts altogether, but extremely well built, extremely robust, and a piece of equipment that would last right through till today. So I think that covers those 3 radios.
And you have some older sets below there, Mark.
Yes, I certainly
it's
do.
A beautiful case on that Atwater Kent. What's that little mantle radio there on the top of those 3 dialers?
On the top of the 3 dialers. Oh, that's a 1930s AC radio. I honestly can't remember. Again, you'll have to forgive me because I don't remember all the radios that I have.
It's got a label there under the.
It's got a label. It's got a label. I can't see it.
I'm trying to get as close as I can, but I can't. I don't. Is that a label or is that just a? Hard to
plate?
Well, I think it is. Let's see. I'm going to go to maximum. I don't. Boy, I'll tell you. I don't know if anyone can make anything out of this. It looks like a number. I can't even see.
Probably has a curtain burner for a cord. You know, that was a popular style.
Yeah, this radio is an AC/DC, and it is got a typical 5-tube layout. Nothing extraordinary on the electronics, although it does show that we're pretty much getting down to, by the 30s, we're getting down to the standard metal box chassis with a tuner on top and a volume control. And so this is where the radios made their final transition from a ganged tuning system to a relatively simple 1 or 2 capacitor tuning system. And again, that's around the 1930s. Now, the radio on the lower left is a battery set. And again, I cannot make the name, but I think my my love of battery sets. Oh, what was the text that just sent up? I missed it.
I was just, Hugh seems to
Maybe
be.
Zenith.
Oh, okay, Zenith. All right, very good. So the radio on the left-hand side is a typical battery set. It is laid out in typical battery set fashion. That would be the tuning section is on the left, and the audio section is entirely on the right. This was typical of radios. For some reason, they felt they had to follow the chain of signals in building a radio. Now, I'm sure there was some technical reasons for it, one of which is what I was telling you last time about the lack of shielding that was used in these radios. Very few, if any, of these early battery sets were shielded. Hopefully, we can look inside of the next one. Now, the middle one, I think, is a Pole Royale. And again, it was a typical 1920s radio, a battery set, 5-tube, and most of them were 5-tube as you got into the 20s. Now, the early 20s saw a lower tube count as they were looking to control costs of these radios. But the better sets typically had 5 tubes, and that would be this one right here. Notice the 3 prominent tuning dials on the front. That is an indicator that there are 3 non-connected air capacitors behind the panel. Interesting enough, the 2 knobs down below were rheostats to control the filament voltage. In these older radios, they frequently used the filament as the volume control, or they would decouple the antenna as a volume control. There really was no intervention in the audio stage, and the audio stages were run wide open on these radios, with any signal negotiation occurring on the beginning of the radio's circuit train. On the right, I honestly cannot identify again. I haven't looked at that radio in quite some time, although I pass it by every time I go up there. That is, again, a classic 3-dialer. Both of these radios are exemplary examples of a 3-dial tuned radio frequency radio, where all stages had to be tuned to the correct frequency in order to eliminate not only the signal strength, but also the side signal rejection of nearby radio stations and things like that. Now, this is actually a 5-tuber, but what's interesting, you can just see the top of the spider web coils, 1, 2, and 3 behind the tuning capacitors. Those spider web coils obviously are part of the LC network for controlling the tuning of that particular stage. And it was quite a job. It was pretty arduous for a non-electronic inclined person to operate one of these radios. And indeed, when the first a single stage radio, single control tuning control radios came out, they obviously held such an advantage insofar as usage by folks that were trying to use these 3-dial complexities of what we call radio. And so we're ready for the next slide.
All right.
Mark, there's a little Philco there on the side of the 3-dialer there.
Just one here.
Nice little set.
There is. And up above it is a chassis for a Zenith chairside that sits up above it. You can notice a slightly extended volume and other control knobs. And this would sit vertically in the armchair radio, Zenith chairside. And you would look down at the dial and work the knobs at your convenience right next to you.
Very nice.
Hopefully
That's another Poly Royal.
Oh, it's another Pole Royale? Okay. Poly Royale, is that how you say it?
I say it Polyroyal.
Okay, no, I get it. I get it. I've never heard it pronounced. So yes, that's correct. But again, I started my radio interest in tube radios and battery sets because that's what I received first. And I never got them working. I never had a tube checker or any means, but I thought they were the greatest thing since sliced bread. Just so fascinating to look inside and see all the components laid out so clearly. So I have since gotten several of the radios working. That's what I've done over the years. Oh, and up above it, the name of that radio was the BD6. I just see the icon now. And that's the wooden frame radio that's directly above the Poly Royale, however you say it. So, and on the far right, you'll see a tuner, excuse me, for an old military radio. That's the gray box. And I thought that was fascinating just because of the sheer mechanicals in that thing. Holy smoke. Digital display, all mechanical. Operational display, all mechanical. The only two real control knobs are mounted on the front. I would expect it would be fine in coarse tune. But it was for some monster transmitter or receiver that only Ross Hostropper would know what it is. So, and the one underneath it is an early car radio, an early automobile radio. Boy, again, here is engineering at its max. They had to not only stuff a radio into a box, but they had to provide mechanical tuning systems to bring out the tuning and bring out the volume out through cables, some of which I still have, with a controlled head that bolted to your steering column, or you bolted it underneath your dashboard. And this gave you radio. Albeit a radio that required that you install spark plug suppressors, usually a hash suppressor over the generator brushes. And at that point, you might be able to hear enough signal through all the automotive noise to make it worthwhile. It was a job.
That's about 10 pounds of technology you're throwing in there.
Yes, yes. And of course, vibrator driven for the B+. And very compact, very well done radio. So compact that I'm afraid to work on them. Otherwise, I'd get one of those fired up. I have 2 or 3 of those, just because they're so interesting. And again, the first radio is applied to the automobile. I'm ready for the next.
All right, cool. This is great.
All right, this is a previous slide. Oh, there's the bandmaster up close.
Cool.
And
Plus
again,
a couple
as
other
I said, this was it's manufactured by Harvey Wells. It contains all of its power supplies and everything. It does not require, as I recall, a external DC supply, but you can see it's got both the VFO and the crystal. It can do both. The meter supplies as a multifunction for both grid and plate milliamperage. And of course, you've got CW and phone, and of course, your basic power and transmit. I thought it was interesting that they even had a transmit key on the radio, but I guess we all do on all modern radios because the foot switch jack is down below for operating this thing from a foot switch. And there's a couple of portables I also collect. The portables I collect, you'll see, are actually from the late 40s into the very early 50s. And this is because I'm interested in the transition between tube portable radios and transistor portable radios. And I've kind of specialized in that genre since then, although I certainly do have a love for the big old AMs that run on AC power. So that pretty much covers that, I think.
Yeah, that's great.
Now, there's a reason for that tuning switch on the transmitter.
Oh, and the trimmer switch?
The switch, the transmit switch on the
Oh, okay, yes, yes.
transmitter is there to tune it while you're at the transmitter if it's not right on your operating station.
And only you would know that, because I've been a ham now for 9 years, and I never use the switch because I'm too on the front panel, because I'm too afraid of not letting it go and forgetting it. But I do tune up with my microphone key, obviously on an open section of the band when I'm tuning my antennas. But yes, I get that. Very good information.
Where do you select the band on there?
The band, you can see at the top, there's drive, plate, and load. There's your tuning. And the band is entirely done by the UFO. So I'm going to assume this would be a fixed frequency radio or a fixed band radio, because you simply do not have the band. I don't know if it's 160, 80, 75, or up to 20 and 10. Although I don't think it's the higher bands. I think it's for the lower bands. I hope that answers.
Well, the Harvey Wells used an 807, and it covered in various iterations 160 all the way up to 2.
Yeah.
Now I'm wondering if you just had to be very, very careful, though it doesn't sound efficient, where you tune that drive, plate, and load. Or you ended up, have you ever seen the VFO for them? They're really cool. They sit underneath, they're kind of flat. But I think that's an earlier model, and the later models did have a band switch. Bill, do you remember?
I've never operated one of those, so I don't know.
Yeah, the Civil Defense Organization, when I was a kid, had one. And so I look at them from time to time with fond memories. But does that name, not nameplate, but frequency chart down below give you any hints, or is it all blank?
Are there plug-in coils?
There are no plug-in coils. There's
no way to easily get in.
Yeah. And you're going to have me taking this thing apart tonight after the meeting, because I've always enjoyed. Hey, 3500.
Right. Okay. Where's the channel? You know what? To the left of that, is that the channel selector?
It must be. It must
Yeah.
be. Look at that.
All right. So that's your band switch.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
so
And it says band underneath.
So how do you fine
Yeah,
tune?
it matches up with that little paper card as far as the bands, the frequency ranges. Yes.
Yeah, it says band right underneath it. I never even noticed that. Right where it says PFO, it says band.
Yep.
So you are correct, sir. Which only shows you that I've never fired up the equipment.
Yeah, and I think the power supply is external, but I'm not sure of that.
Okay. All right.
It
Yeah,
looks
it is.
like the VFO might have been external too.
Yes, it is. It's almost about the size of a large book, and it's flat, and it sits underneath with a slide rule dial that's at about 45-degree angle to the bottom of the bench or whatever. It's an interesting looking VFO.
Yeah, and again, I can't wait to take it apart at this point. But suffice to say, you are the first folks that have ever birthed me on the Harvey Wells. I think that's fascinating. There are connectors on the back, of course, and having never operated it or even gotten the book on it, I would defer to your knowledge.
Go pick it up,
Hey,
and you'll
Mark,
know
what are
quickly
those
whether or
two
not
little
there's a power
portables?
supply in there.
I'm sorry.
I haven't picked that radio up in 35 years.
Wow.
Hey, Mark, what are those? You got a little portable there. It looks like a really pristine leather case,
Yeah.
and then another little portable on top. Do you recall?
I
what
want to
those are
say
by any
that's a
chance?
GE. And again, it's interesting because I do believe that is a radio that contains the first transistors with one of those open metal
Very nice.
chassis and all the huge permanent magnet speaker and the big potentiometer and 2 big transformers for inter-audio stages. So I suspect that's an early transistor. The one up above, I'm pretty sure that's an early tube rig. That's a compact tube rig. portable.
Very nice.
Yeah, neat. Good stuff.
It's
What
funny
else
how
do
they
you got?
it's funny how they made a lot of the early
Oh, that's a
transistor
beauty.
radios so large because they put these huge batteries in them that would run them for months compared to the week or so you might get out of your tube portable. So this is an interesting speaker, obviously with the cellulite pedals, very expensive speaker to purchase and a very expensive speaker to buy nowadays. It is my favorite. It actually works. It actually adjusts the little bar you see traversing the center of the driver. Excuse me, that moves the voice coils away and towards the diaphragm. So you get a higher or lower magnetic coupling. Why, I have no idea, because these things were pretty much run wide open because you just couldn't get enough signal out of the early battery sets at that time when that speaker came out to really drive the speaker properly. But I'm sure the engineers thought that you may be putting more power into it as time goes by, and it would need to accept at least a few watts of audio power.
It was a volume control.
Yes, it's a volume control, and like I say, it establishes the gap between the coils, excuse me, and the diaphragm, the steel diaphragm. Next photo, we're good. Oh, there's an Atwater Kent speaker in the back there. Oh, and there's a BFO in the back. Who knows what the BFO on the left-hand side is?
Oh, this one right here.
Yep, is that for Harvey Wells?
No,
Okay, just a GP general purpose BFO.
Not to mention the nice Thomas Edison portrait sitting there.
Oh yeah, Tom's been a hero of mine since I was a kid. All right, good old Tom.
Interesting
Keeps an eye
character.
over me. He makes sure I stay in line when I'm up there in the museum. He's sort of got this very disciplinarian look about him, and he does look right at you. He follows you around the entire museum.
Always
I'm
good
waiting.
watching over your shoulder.
I'm waiting for the eyeballs to move inside the picture.
They might jump.
Yeah. So next shot. Oh, by the way, that was a very good speaker. That was Atwater Kent's first try at making electrodynamic speakers. Just thought I'd mention that. All right, Browning Drake. What a cool radio this is. I have two of the Browning Drakes, and they are at the transition period. This one's probably 1925, 1926. And they are right at the cusp of the changeover from battery sets to electrical sets. I'm sure you could purchase a battery eliminator for most of these radios made post 1926, 1927. So the Browning Drake is interesting in that it used a true regen front end with the squeal and everything. And the radios actually worked extremely well. They had circuitry that was quite remarkable for their day, that did things like narrow the tuning, sharpen up the signals coming from the tuner to the rest of the audio. And they were quite successful. They had quite a high volume. They could be run by phones or speakers, as you see Jack 1 and Jack 2 on the front of the radio. They incorporated those absolutely stunning variable dials, which you find on a lot of radios. You're going to see those on other home builts that I'm going to show you. But it's got to be about a 10-to-1, 15-to-1 ratio between the fine tune and the dial itself. And I'm not sure, there's a second switch behind the dial knobs that also controls, I think, what might be fine tuning or fine adjustment.
yeah, it adjusts the tuning ratio. Those are national dials.
Oh, so you know how a national dial works?
Yeah.
Oh, for heaven's sake. So you could adjust the ratio
Yep.
of the tuning by working the brass knobs.
By working that lever right behind the bottom.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely. Now you see, man, am I learning? This is terrific. I'm really enjoying having a group of guys that actually know about this stuff, because about 1% of the museum tours actually come up knowing vintage radio. Most of my tours are ham radio and car guys, motorcycle clubs. I've had several of the Whitman clubs, several of the amateur clubs up here, and several of the car collector clubs, of which they overlap into both ham radio and electronics, vintage electronics. So you got your master volume, you've got your intensity. Intensity as in what? Tone or signal? And we've yet to find that out with the proverbial on-off switch on the left-hand side. It's interesting, the volume is actually on the right. I just noticed that. That's on the far right. So master control, I don't know, tube filaments perhaps.
The intensity is actually a regeneration control, I believe. You increase the regeneration, you make it sharper, or
yes,
can go into AM mode.
And hence the occasional trip into squeal land. As you know, all regens squeal at some point, and they all transmit at some point. Interesting story. In the olden days, where I showed you those first, well, I haven't shown you the Clap-Eastham yet, but the Crossley radios. You'd get an apartment building full of radios, all with their own antennas, all trying to hear their own stations, and they would just squeal each other to death.
Yeah.
Until you got like 2 or 3 apartments away from the offending radio. But they would transmit. I actually turned one into a transmitter. I put a long wire on it, and I was able to, and put it into oscillation, and I was able to transmit a couple of 100 feet with a extended long wire from that radio. And by modulating the B plus going to the, I don't know if it was a 1-2, I think it was a 2-tube Crossley. No, it was a 1-tube. And I could actually get the modulation quite nicely onto the tube itself via the B plus, and turn this 1-tube Crossley radio into a respectable AM transmitter.
I vividly remember seeing schematics in the old radio magazines for schemes to make a regenerative receiver into a transceiver to transmit and receive both.
Well, it certainly was capable of both with some fairly minor circuit changes. So I'm gonna put my official stamp on that comment of yours, Bill.
Yeah,
I think.
I can't lay hands on it, but I know I've run across that.
Yep. Well, and up above the Browning, Drake, you see a typical speaker for the day. What's interesting is that a lot of these speakers that you see all use small earphone type transducers, and they all have the optical pathway to the opening in the front. And some were actually quite well done. And they actually had some semblance, I don't know, probably down to 800-900 hertz of audio range. I think the Baldwin transducers were probably the best ones, Baldwin being famous for earphones as well. But they actually brought danceable music into the room, where for once you didn't put all your headphones into mother's mixing bowl, so you could stand around and you could all listen in with mother's mixing bowl acting as the audio amplifier slash directionality for the sound waves. So speakers were a big part. That should do it for that one, I think.
All right.
If anybody has any questions or comments, I please welcome you to interrupt me and stop me. All
Sure.
right. three interesting artifacts. We're going to start with the one on the left. If you look, you can see it is virtually peppered with connections and not a lot of switches, because most of your connecting on this, it's a Supreme. You all remember the Supreme tube testers and things like that. Well, they also made radio testers, which I thought was interesting. If you look down below, you can see an ohms range. If you look to the right, you can see a voltage range. The top, I forget, but I can't quite read them, but they're for tapping signals off of the radio. And then finally, you see a couple of, what are they, 7-pin and 6-pin sockets. And those hooked up to the harnesses that come equipped with the radio. You can just catch a view of them in the back storage area. And you would literally drag out this harness. You could plug it in and you could connect it to various parts of the radio. And then using the multi-position switch in the front, you would actually select the tests that you wanted to do on that radio. I see DC milliamps. Oh boy, I see ohms, DC volts, AC volts. Yeah. Oh, microfarads. Look at that. Microfarads. I did not even know it had a microfarad. So it's a capacitor tester as well. Now in the center, now I guess I'll go right to the right. Let's go right to the right, because the center one's my favorite. On the right is a typical signal generator. I think Radio City Products signal generator. Yes, and it's got such a beautiful 1920s/30s Art Deco look to it.
Yeah,
I don't put a lot of test equipment in my museum unless they look extraordinary. And this radio certainly, I mean, even look at the chicken head dial on it. It's stylized. It's not a typical chicken head. And the dial itself with the octagon bezel, it was just a very attractive piece. And I can only imagine the service guy that put that up on his shelf, looked at that every day with satisfaction.
Yeah, for sure. It's very attractive.
Now the device in the center. One of the things yeah, exactly. One of the things I collect are medical coils. They're a high frequency induction coil that, just like a spark transmitter, they employ a small spark device, only it's only a vibrator. There's no real high voltage to speak of until you get to the external stage. So I guess it's more like a radio vibrator for a car radio. And this takes a preliminary AC voltage, breaks it into a vibration, of which you can control the frequency and strength. And there is a connector that plugs in and connects to the various apparati that you see. Now, there's one for combing your scalp. All right, you can see that's pretty apparent by the tines. This would glow blue the moment it contacted your scalp. And indeed, it glowed blue right down to the tips and would form tiny little contact sparks with your scalp, just like it does with your skin. But once you have the contact established, there is a heat formed between the tips of any of the implements and the skin where you attach it to. Hence the thought that this thing created electrical stimulation to make heat inside of joints through radio frequency application. I know that's a mouthful, but what it basically means is you had a high voltage spark that lights up the tube, and when you put it on your skin, the spark spreads out over the entire surface and literally makes the entire area of your skin with this contact glow bright blue inside the tube. So that's how you know you've made contact with the device. And this thing produces mild electrical shock, nothing outstanding. But again, the idea was to heat up the joint and get the heat through radio frequency stimulation into the joint or area or muscle that was being treated. So they call them quack coils, but when you look at the heat generated as you ran this thing over the back of your hands, over your knuckles, over your elbows, it produces enough heat that you actually feel like your joint is becoming warmed by this device.
How well
So,
does the comb work?
I have tried everything, and I don't think anything does anything. I've had a couple of arthritic people come up to the museum, and they actually swear they had some arthritic pain, 2 or 3 people now, and they swear it was in their hands. It was elderly people with arthritis in their hands and wrists, and they swear that it made a difference. They felt better after roughly a few minutes of treatment.
Interesting.
Well, sometimes when you get a strain of muscle or something, they recommend either hot or cold packing on it. And I suppose this would make the hot version.
Yes, it
So
certainly
it
would.
actually have some therapeutic aid, but no better than putting a hot pack on the same surface.
Yeah. It's
I,
interesting that this
Go ahead,
is from Germany, as you can see from the, this is the regulator, and obviously this is from low to high, where this must be presumably something. I forget what in German what this stands for. This is middle level. This is roughly harsh, and then really harsh it would be roughly the. So this is obviously increasing amount of heat, I suppose. Of very interesting. Electroson fan.
Yep. Electroson German. By the way, for those of you that ever attempt to try with one of these things, I've got a number of them that function. Please start out on the low setting, because the high setting is, I can't even put the electrode to somebody's skin because the spark is well over a ½ inch long that comes out to greet the person's flesh, and they recoil in horror when I go to apply the thing to their skin, the probe to their skin. So they pack quite a punch.
So do pay attention to this word when they say very harsh. That's there means very, so that's going to be harsh. So
it's strong enough to make you recoil. However, if you start out with the device on your skin, you maintain contact with the device on your skin, you can turn it up pretty high before you start to feel really uncomfortable. Let's put it this way. I would never use a setting just to go directly to the skin. I would go on to the skin, and then I would accelerate the power to the area what I was looking for.
This is fun for the whole family.
It certainly is, and it's been fun for the kids. We had 8 nieces and nephews and their friends, and we would do sleepovers here at Vess World. I call it Vess World. We've got a little over 12 acres, and I had a whole slew of go-karts and motorbikes. But they would, on the rainy days especially, they would come up and they would dawdle in the museum. And I would just kind of sit back and hang back with a cup of coffee, and the questions would come, and I'd start something up for the kids. The most fun those kids ever had, excuse me, please, were the wind-up Victrolas and the electrical medical coils. They thought those were a hoot, kids being a lot more daring than adults.
I always liked the manuals for them. They applied those probes to some interesting places. I can imagine the reaction.
Well, I had one that had 2 little fingers coming off of it. The fingers were roughly 1 inch long, and I don't even want to think where that thing was placed. I'll tell you right now. And that's in another medical kit that I have. And of course, the one that you see there that is just a tube with a cap on it. Yeah, I don't know where that would go, but I don't want it. I don't think it was in your mouth, boys.
No.
All right, any more questions or I'll move on?
Hemorrhoids be gone.
Yes. I wondered if it even worked. I wonder if it even worked. I don't
Only
have
one way to find out in the name of science.
I'll need a volunteer from one of you gentlemen.
Well, I
I'm
guess
busy.
before the era of creams were introduced.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Without a doubt.
Why
Nasty
creams
little
were
device.
invented.
That's
Yes.
right. Well, you need preparation H after using it.
I actually have medical coils. I hope I have some pictures of them that actually do connect to you with either cylinders or electrodes. And that runs roughly between 75 and 300 volts to your body. I've actually measured them, and they're along the same idea, except they have the spark coil for the high voltage, but they don't use the ultraviolet gas tubes. They use direct connection, which got to be a whole nother ball game and pain. All right, I'm ready.
All right.
Okay, so now we come to the everybody has a favorite radio, and I guess mine would have to be the Atwater Kent. I lusted after one of these for years and years, for decades. When I started collecting radios, I'd see them in books. This was the ultimate unobtainium for me. We all have our unobtainiums. In other words, a place where our wallet cannot go. And Marty, it wasn't Marty Bunis, but I bought this up at the Rehoboth Antique Radio Show, and absolutely derelict, terrible condition. Missing parts, all the tubes gone. It had faded brasswork throughout. And so I took it on as my baby, and I had an open interstage winding, which again, I want to show you. Look at the interstage windings. They are left, middle, and right. They got those things as far away as possible, because interstage coupling has always been a problem with early radios. And it did not come apparent until slightly later on. I want to say 1924, 1925, which is about the year of this radio, when they realized that the coils interstage coils had to be either shielded or placed in different axes. In other words, if you open up a Model 20 Atwater Kent, you'll see where the left-hand coil is skewed to the rear. You'll see that the middle coil is skewed to the right, and you will see that the far right coil is skewed to the outside of the radio. And in this way, they were able to keep the magnetic interference from coupling between the interstage transformers. But by golly, they sure did cover the tuning capacitors quite nicely with the typical Atwater Kent friction drive reduction. The filament capacitor is prominent, the filament resistor is prominently displayed between the first two units. And I have pictures of this on my, oh, by the way, one end was broken off as well. And I decided to restore this to its original finish, crackle and all, because if there's a finish there, I just can't see changing it unless it's got some broken veneer or something like that. I didn't want to touch it. I used wax. I didn't even use any clear coat or anything like that, which I think can hurt. A clear coat can hurt a restored piece.
Yeah. No, it can only be original once. It's too nice to
Exactly. So this is my Atwater Kent. I have a bunch of very good O1As in there, all tested in the 80-90 percentile. And I have a number of tube testers. I'm sure you gentlemen do, but I typically have keep 5 tube testers on hand to go right up from the 4 prongers all the way up to nuvistors and transistors. So we're going to see the next shot is going to contain the island view of the same radio. So if we can move to the next shot.
And a Model 10?
Yes, it's a Model 10. And of course, they came in the Model 10 ABC. And I believe this is a Model A because it does not contain the power cord. In order to, as a cost-saving measure, Atwater Kent wiped out all of the knurled nuts on the back of the set that you can't see. They're behind the 3-tube island that you see. There's a whole row of high voltage, low voltage interface for an external power supply or batteries. And as we all know, Atwater Kent did make a number of power supplies for their battery radios, especially when AC first started to come in. But on the right-hand side, you'll see something very unusual. This is the 3-tube audio output section. Again, it's on the right-hand side of the radio. It can be grouped close together because there's no RF per se. It's the audio that's going into this thing, so you can have everything close together without repercussion. You'll see these two monster binding posts on the right-hand side. They're dual posts, so you could have 2 sets of headphones for a listening pleasure with a co-person. And that is your binding post. You have your tube rheostat, your second tube rheostat. This is for the 3 tubes in the cluster. And that is directly in front. And these rheostats are typically 15, 20 ohms, wire wound exclusively. Although in the earlier radios, they did have a compression resistor that, as you can probably imagine, are a stack of carbon blocks that are stacked up with a jack screw on one end, and it's held in a case. And you actually compress the carbon blocks to increase the volume and or tube voltage. I would have to say it would have to be pretty robust for tube volume, but I have seen them driving a single tube or maybe a couple of tubes with carbon compression. But most of your radios are indeed nichrome wire wound, circular operated variable resistors. But it does play. It plays in a horn. It fills the room with the tinniest, worst music you ever heard in your life. But it certainly was a radio that could be looked at the same time that it is being heard over the attached horn speaker.
That's really neat, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, I put a lot of work into it. Took me a couple of months altogether.
Cool.
Nobody does. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry. There we go. Get this. There's a nice Zenith carrying it.
Oh yes, right. Yes, I did get the Zenith in there. Now I'm curious. This is a Zenith black dial with the, I guess they call it a satellite knob down below because it's got the outer ring. The inner ring, I think, is for the on-off volume. The middle ring is for rough tuning or fine. Somebody's going to correct me on this. And the outer ring is for tuning as well. All right, who's going to, and of course, the push buttons speak for themselves. They have the original push buttons on them. Who knows the most about this radio? Because I know nothing. Boy, it's that obscure of a radio, huh? Am I still coming through, John?
Oh yeah, no, I can hear you great, Mark.
Okay. I hear silence and I get worried. All right, so Zenith, black dial, push button.
Beautiful cabinet, though. Really very nice.
It's gorgeous. Look at the woodwork on that thing. Absolutely. It's almost a travesty that they went through a different woodwork to a different wood panel where the controls are mounted, because the surrounding trim is just so nice. That even has the original speaker cloth in it. It was so well kept. The inside was fairly clean. It is not a runner yet, but it is going to be.
No, it doesn't look like anything cosmetically needs to be dealt with, at least nothing too significant, just mostly tidying up.
I tried. Go ahead, please.
You can see it's a local radio because it's got WBZ, WHDH, WEEI. So it's definitely not, definitely from the area.
And if you don't think it's not a chore to swing that tuning device around with those little tiny buttons, I think they only have about a ½ inch of travel, but sometimes they have to traverse several number of degrees on the dial. And it's just amazing that that little button has the force and the wherewithal to actually push that dial pointer around to where you want it. And that for the most part, it stops where you want it, with occasional retuning required.
That gets you in the neighborhood.
Get you in the neighborhood.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoy these. I really do. So my
Oh,
collecting habits. Yeah, my collecting habits. I'm sorry I didn't capture the other side. This typical picture was done for insurance purposes. My museum is cleaned by a young lady who lives in the apartment next door. I hire her every spring to come up and help me uncover. Everything's covered during the winter and clean. Well, obviously that was prior to the spring cleaning, but you've got a 505, I think it is. That's the dial in the front. You've got a nice multi-push button inter-building intercom system. 503, I think that is. Somebody will correct me who knows phones. You got, they're all standard. Nothing here is unusual or different. At that point in time, phones were going through a rejuvenation in collecting, and I just couldn't afford nice phones. So this is also the very, very beginning of my collection. And these phones, again, they go back to some 30 plus years ago, sitting in the exact same spot. I don't change out the museum because I don't have the storage space to put any of the stuff that I would rotate in the collections. I do rotate out single pieces once in a great while, but the collections are extremely static. And one fellow explained it to me, he was a ham, how he had come up in the museum years and years ago, and he arrived some years later in an open house that I was having, and was pleasantly surprised to see everything etched in time, held in time, just the way it was, with additions, of course, from the last time he had been there. So it's a very static museum. It's the only way I know how to do it. So that is the phones. And you can see little intercom phones for home use. Unfortunately, there's some better phones. I have purchased candlesticks, Western Electric, the premier brand, on the left-hand side.
see the
Western Electric, Kellogg, Stromberg, Carlson, those were all the big names in telephone electronics back in their day.
It hurts me to see a collection like that because that rearmost dial phone is the working phone in my radio room.
It's a working phone with the dial?
Yep.
Oh, I think that is a hoot. Yeah, I had.
One here, Bill?
I use it.
Cool.
I had a vintage phone. It looked like a European phone with very ornate brasswork and a couple of filigree arms to hold the handset up. And the handset was done in typical teens fashions with brass receiver and transmitter and a very decorative brass handle, decorative phone, and it contained a generator. So that's how you dial up. Well, I converted it just to come on without the generator. Or I guess the generator was out of the circuit when you lifted the handset. That was it. And my wife and I had it on the night table for years and years and years. I would say over a decade, couple of decades. But it was convenient and it was a novelty, but the novelty wore off because it just sounded so tinny. There's nothing worse than a vintage carbon microphone coupled with a vintage earpiece. I think that's what I have for that.
Well, mine is the first phone I got when I came to Maine. It's about 50, 52, 54 years old. And when I got a phone installed in my mobile home, that was the first phone I ever had.
Oh, for heaven's sakes. I think that's totally cool. Yeah, I knew this would pull some memories out of the crow. Keep it coming, gentlemen. All right, I'm ready for next slide.
Lots of
So-
phones.
Oh, go right ahead, please.
Oh, go ahead. I was saying lots of microphones here and some various tubes.
Yeah, the museum is very eclectic. As you can see from the surroundings, we have a nice little collection of Victrolas. Going back to the teens, I have an Edison phonograph that dates back to the 1800s, but the microphones are nothing really fantastic. Left to right, they're typical communications mics. Of course, obviously, there's a D104 with a preamp that's certainly not that old. I'll say it's the 60s. The tubes I liked because they were balloon audio tubes. I forget the number. They're probably some form of number 45 tubes, but they had huge plates, a huge wide filament, and of course they were extra size in the envelope. And I just thought it was so neat because you could look down inside and see all the elements of the tube. And that was until I discovered Western Electric 501s D's, the spherical Western Electric tubes. And I had a couple of those on display for a while, but tubes, I have a number on display, and I could hopefully show those to you later, if not at a later date. Interesting enough, the two small microphones with the small holes dotted around them were sold to people who wanted to turn their radio into an audio system. Both of those microphones used a carbon element, and they were placed into the circuitry of the radio, probably B+, and it turned the radio into an announcer microphone, only a few watts of the radio, of course. The one in the middle that looks somewhat like its 1930s designer, it came from a wire recorder. And I had several wire recorders at one point. I just thought it was amazing that they could find enough steel in that thin wire to leave a magnetic impression similar to audio tape. And that's how they work. It has a thin wire instead of the audio tape with the electromagnet to impress the signal. I know I'm not going to show one of these, so I can talk about it. And you could record off the radio that was included in the cabinet, or you had a tabletop model that did not have the radio, and it used a simple microphone to insert the audio. And families would buy these and use these to make audio recordings of either music. Boy, I could never listen to music from a wire recorder, but mostly for family remembrances and family history and things of that sort. Because before the wire recorder, the only thing you had was a recordable phonograph disc, which would mechanically record via a needle that was connected to a rather strong, large diaphragm. And you could do home recordings on wax. But your real first movable medium was wire recorders. And then once the plastic for tape recorders and oxide began to be developed, you could certainly see a number of tape recorders coming into existence. All right, I went way too long on that. Next slide, please.
All right. More phones.
Yeah, I actually have 5 of these now. I was very careful to select ones that were, again, in good condition. The one on the left, I actually restored. That was given to me by family members. You can see it looks a lot lighter. Shame on me. But I did keep the original woodwork as much as I could. I certainly didn't paint it. I've seen painted telephones before. And then the one on the right is a Kellogg American and Western Electric. And that was given to me in that condition. It was good enough and functional enough that I put it right up in the museum after a washing. Believe it or not, everything's been washed before it goes up in the museum. And these were all around the world. Oh my goodness, they were great because you could be far enough from the telephone exchange that your 90-volt magneto could ring them up even over that several miles of wire. It had a couple of battery cells inside to produce a local voltage, which would, and they actually had the interstage transformer at that point. That was invented for telephones, where the local circuit would handle the carbon microphone and the earphone in series with the transformer. And this was then placed out electromagnetically or inductively over the phone lines at a much higher signal than you would get if you just kept the resistance of the original line voltage. In other words, you got a chance to boost the signal dramatically using a local line, carbon mic and earpiece. And that would make sure that the signal would travel the miles that it was needed to get back to the phone exchange. So very interesting mechanics inside the 90-volt generator, alternator, I guess you could call it. We'll call it a generator. Certainly produced enough voltage to go quite the distance. And two batteries, 3 volts, two dry cell batteries in the bottom of the thing gave the local circuit enough oomph to make sure that the signal got back to the exchange. And by the same token, the transformer did also arrange the signal so it could be heard through the microphone at the listener, at the customer's location. You have a ring box on the right. You have a kilowatt hour meter down on the left-hand side, tucked in there, barely visible, with a silver frame. What's interesting is you see the black round thing that's on that. That is a DC motor. Those are windings for a direct current motor. You still see the shunt, the magnetic shunt at the bottom, which introduced a magnetic lag into a disc that rotated directly around the bottom. It's the same disc and attenuator that we see on our older house meters today. The difference being it had a direct current motor to drive the rest of the mechanism according to load. It's got brushes, which are on the right-hand side. They're a little fuzzy in view, but those are brushes tucked in there. And it spins the armature, which, by the way, has no ferrous in it. It's entirely a coil that turns on a light Bakelite form. And the coil, you can see the driver coil is on the front, on the outside, the black ring with coil windings you can see just inside the ring. And that was enough between the brushes and the ring, which provided the field to make that electric rotor track direct current quite nicely to give reasonably accurate power readings in kilowatts. And all of the dials are way up top, and just out of view is your clockwork. And your clockwork still employs four different ranges of kilowatt hours. So, and underneath in the middle is a microphone with a shield that I'm hoping somebody can identify it. I'm not sure if it's aircraft carrier. It's for use in a noisy location. Was it an operator's microphone? Was it a radio technician microphone used in a very busy room? Any takers?
I know it was fun to talk to people on these things. I don't know what my wife's family had in their home, but when I was courting her in the late 50s, early 60s, her family lived out in a little town in New York called Esperance, a little west of Schenectady. And they had one of these local systems. And if I was out of town and called her long distance, I'd call a long distance operator and say, I need Esperance 221. She'd say, yeah, what's the rest of the number? I said, that's it. I had to tell her to call the Schenectady operator and ask for Esperance 221. And the Schenectady operator knew it and would call and hook it up.
That's
But,
funny.
they were interesting systems. My wife said that she could call a neighbor and the operator would say, "Oh, she's not at home. I just saw her walking down the street going to Apple's beauty parlor."
I think that's wonderful. I too remember the 4-number system. And I remember I was probably 7 or 8 when we finally got area codes. And I thought, you got to do what? It wasn't even in the area code. Yeah, area code 781-294. No, when we got the full number. So it's 4 or 5. Well, we got 7 digits. When we went from 4 to 7 digits, I remember being upset as a kid that we had to dial those stupid extra numbers. I thought that was
our first 2 numbers were always a name. Either it was like state or union, or you'd call
we had
union,
Cypress.
Union 1, 2, 3, 4, or state 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, actually, what you were dialing was the S and T letters on the dial, or the U and an N, which equated to a number eventually. Yeah.
Yeah, I do recall that. And our number was Cypress, so it would be CY 781-293-2442, my parents' old number. And but indeed, we were able to dial 4 digits, I recall. Now, whether or not that included the first 2 alphanumerics, but I'm pretty sure we could dial 4 digits. We lived way out in the sticks, like you. Hanson was, our population was 2,000 when we moved here back in 1955. I think we moved to Hanson.
I think that 4-digit deal worked on local area groups.
Yep.
That must have been it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of that stuff carried through into the 70s, you know.
Oh, I'm sure. But what a nice sound those bells give when they ring. I should have had one here set up to play it for you. But I think we've all heard old bells. Oh, look down below the phones. You see those little cigarette lighter thingies.
Yeah.
I also collect vintage hearing aids. I am also incredibly interested in the changeover from tube type hearing aids to transistorized hearing aids. As we all know, or maybe some of us don't, hearing aids and transistors were the first things, I'm trying to get the glare out of my eyes here, were the first things to be converted to transistors. And indeed, it's so funny to open up that one in the middle there that has a little black window. You open that up, it has 3 pencil tubes, apparently 3 pencil tubes and 2 transformers, tiny transformers, of course, were enough to produce a good signal for a hearing aid.
The first hearing aid I remember when I was a kid was about the size of a pack of cigarettes. You'd sit in your shirt pocket and you'd have a wire running up to an earphone.
Oh, okay.
It was just a little audio amplifier of some sort.
I can do you one better. I have hearing aids in my collection that are all unamplified. They had a fairly high voltage battery, like 22.5 volts. They had a carbon microphone, and they had a highly sensitive earpiece. And this thing had like 3 wires coming out of it. You had the power supply like you were talking about. You had to have, how did it work? It had, I think one that I had 2 wires coming out of it for a microphone and earphone, because you could wear this thing inside your clothing. You could clip the microphone to the front of your lapel. And then of course you had the earpiece with the wraparound band for your ear, or you just hold it. A lot of them came with a handle, and you just hold the earpiece, electric earpiece, up to your ear. But those are hearing aids, and boy, I can sure get into that if there's any interest later on.
I would love to make a little QRP transmitter and a regen with pencil tubes. I think that'd be fun.
Well, I have the pencil tubes,
Okay.
if that helps you at all.
I've got
All
a
right.
bunch of them, but I'm not going to be very high power. Thank you.
We all have pencil tubes. I don't know any tube guy who doesn't have a few in his collection,
Yeah.
unless somebody raises his hand here. So next photograph.
All right. TV, an admiral.
Yep, you betcha. It's so funny. That's the first TV set I collected with a round tube. And I was so enamored of the design. And I'd been taking apart TVs since I was probably 9 or 10. I got them from the dump. I took them apart. I finally got the old family television set, which was an Admiral, but it had the square tube. So later model, early 50s. This one probably is what, mid-late 40s? To anybody who's inquisitive. This. Go ahead, please.
No, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I would say because of the round kinscope that it's got to be 40s.
Yeah,
So,
I love those knobs.
look at the nice way that the bezel is put together for that. It's just a very attractive set. It came complete with everything, and everything is there. On the left hand side is an audio amplifier and a phonograph on the left hand side. Now it's interesting. He actually left the phonograph in the down position in his. This was in a shack, a shanty that was this guy's getaway place in the middle of a swamp of all places. It was probably 2 feet above the water level. It had the most disgusting swimming hole that you could possibly imagine, but it was very, very damp. And sure enough, I go to the house, I see the phonograph is still in the down position, and it is rusty. So maybe someday that'll get my treatment, as I do like this early Admiral set. None of my TVs are functioning right now. I have one right now that I'm trying to re-wet my teeth or sharpen my teeth on, that is in pieces, and that is the TS 180 or 880 or whatever it was. I offered it to you guys for free at one point.
Oh, I remember that.
Yep. I still have it. If anybody wants it, it's all complete, good shape. I took the tube out and treated it with kid gloves. Hasn't been inverted or anything. So
I bet it's got a ferocious bite.
Oh, that's the brute force high voltage transformer that you're talking about. And I couldn't agree more. I don't know what year it was. They finally brought that thing down to a few milliamps, but I got hit by that. The Admiral TV that I set up in my bedroom, of course, the first thing I did was take it completely out of the cabinet and set it on my bureau as a TV set without a case. And I learned all about it. I had some television stuff. I grew up with the Encyclopedia Britannica. You guys must remember those.
Oh, sure.
My parents put the 12 volume and the 16 volume set in the bookcase on my in my bedroom. And when you were sick, when you're stuck inside, where do you think you went to as a kid for reading material? The Encyclopedia Britannica. And they actually had a section on how television works. And I would apply that to the TV sitting up in my bureau and be absolutely delighted with it. I got 3 channels, 2, 4, and 5. Channel 7 wouldn't come in. No UHF whatsoever. And I think it did not have channel 1. Channel 1, if a set has a channel 1, that is post 1945, to the best of my recollect. And anything that does not have channel 1 on the tuner is, that does have the channel 1 is prior to that, earlier 40s and late 30s. But I don't know anybody who's got a late 30s television set. I'd give my right arm for it. So moving on.
Emerson.
Yep. Emerson. And if you look on this set, it is just past the Channel 1 version of this same television set. Channel 1 got claimed by the FCC for some other communications or something. And at that point, Channel 1 disappeared from manufactured televisions somewhere during the early to mid 40s. And this is a post Channel 1 removal set, but it is still interesting in that it uses the round kinescope and very well done. I apologize for the stains. Again, this was probably taken during my inventory period of the museum. Any crappy pictures are done during inventory. Obviously, I had to take out a rather substantial insurance policy on all this stuff. And the first questions they asked is, do you have everything documented? And my response was, what?
Yeah.
Being, well over 1,000 pieces. So I took it upon myself with the assistance of a auction house for a fee to document every piece in that collection. Unfortunately, it is since probably increased by 1/3 easily in size. So Emerson TV, brute force flyback, sure. Channel 1, no. Round picture tube, yes. Just a cool TV.
Yeah, that's attractive. Very attractive.
Ready for next.
Ah, here's an RCA.
RCA Victor. Slightly later than the T-series I was offering for sale, but nonetheless, offering a picture tube. I do have the dial in my collection someplace. Somehow that thing fell off or something, and I pocketed it and put it in with my other, quote, missing dial collection. But you can see the mask has come down a little bit on the inside. Again, this set has not been removed for 30 plus years. It's showing its age, sitting up in here in a actually a pretty tight barn. I put storms on the one original 1800s window that's in the back of this thing. I wanted to preserve the window, and I had the front door rebuilt to be tight and re-roofed it with new roofing. So it is a tight barn structure with a few little wispy places, a few air leaks around the eaves, which I've caulked most of them. But it still gets moisture at some point. And I can't say it's the summertime because it's hot as hell up there. Don't come here in the summer. You better be wearing a, I don't know, very light clothing and be ready to be up in, I've seen it like over 100 degrees up there, in the hot weather. But RCA Victor television set, not restored yet. And we're ready for the next one.
All right. Oh, this Westinghouse.
Yeah, now this one might have the Channel 1. I don't know if you can get down to that dial close enough.
There, Mark.
13, 7 through 13.
I think that's 2, 2, 3, 4 goes all the way up to 13. Looks like it's it's
1, 2, 3.
You
1,
see?
3, 4. No, it's 2, 3, 4, I think.
Yeah, 2, 3, 4, yeah.
It's 2, 3, 4. So it's post number 1.
Yeah.
Post number 1, because there's always, Channel 2 has always been there on television broadcast going back to the 40s. But here again, very nice cabinet, a little more dinged up than most. The dials are that mixed plastic dial material, marbled plastic.
Yeah.
And it looks really cool. It's a really cool addition to the set. They only did it with the secondary dials in front, not with the primary dials in front. But I love old TVs. I grew up with an old television set since I was a kid. And boy, it sure is nice. I'm looking to getting an electrostatic television, of which I have a couple. Maybe we'll come to the electrostatic television next. But go ahead and hit me for the next picture.
No problem. I was just looking at all the nice writings.
Oh, on the right.
All on the
Yes.
channels. Contrast.
Yes.
Brightness.
Nice.
vertical hold and of course on off.
They put everything up front. Now, half that stuff would be in the back of the next
Yeah, this-
generation TV set. Now, if you look on the far right-hand side, there is my Edison Victrola. I love that thing. I put a cylinder on that, and I'll put on something real corny like "Shawnee Baby" or something like that from the teens, and people love it. They love to hear those old cylinders. And you
Oh,
can
yeah.
see the Edison cylinders down on the right. It's my only working Edison player because they're getting $300 for a decent one of these nowadays. I
Oh.
paid, go ahead, please.
No, oh yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, they're very expensive and getting harder to find, but I have one. There you go. That's a great picture. It shows the Edison phonograph and all of its chromed out brass beauty, and of course the tubes. I had an inkling for one of the radio shows that I was attending at the time, and you can see that was quite a while ago. That has been on exhibition for at least 20 years. So I have to be going to the radio shows for longer than that. And there was a tube contest that I heard of. Well, I got all pumped up and I picked out my most special tubes and I mounted them up there. And I put you can see the pieces of paper of the lengthy performance printouts for all of the tubes that they sold, the UX series and so forth. And so you got a full performance sheet with your tube wrapped up or wrapped around the tube inside the box. And this is what they look like on display. They told you all that stuff just so you could know what your tube is and where you are supposed to put it. The UX 226 being a slightly later tube. 226, I want to say, came out in the later, mid to late 20s. You got a DeForest audio on there. You've got your Radiotrons, and you've got your Arcturus Blue on the left-hand side. And on the right is interesting because you've got 1.5 volt tubes. Those small 4-prongers are actually 199s. Well, there's the 199s there, and I forget what the two larger ones next to it were, but they were similar to the 199 in that they contain a 1.5 volt filament for dry cell applications. All right. Oh, I think those other two are DeForest. Oh, I'm sorry, they're 5 volt Audions. So the ones on the left are early DeForest 5 volt Audions. The ones on the right are the 199s, also called the 99 series. And they are the 1.5 volt filaments. The DeForest are 5 volt filaments. Why was 5 volt chosen for all the tubes you see to the left? Because you could obtain 6 volts from a storage battery, which is typically what you used for lighting filaments. And they had several times the capacity, the ampere hour capacity of dry cells. So people used wet cell batteries in a 6 volt configuration with chargers. Don't forget, a car battery charger would work with a 6 volt battery because that's all they had was 6 volt cars. And in addition to that, if you were lucky enough to have direct current going through your home, you could take a simple 60 watt Edison light bulb, wire it in series, get the polarity correct, and use house current, 100 volts or 110 volts, they came in both sizes, to charge your wet cell batteries. Just don't leave them on because they'd overcook in a relatively short amount of time. But the light bulb serves as the current limiting device, so you can put an amp on your battery and charge it up from the household current. You've got, anybody remember Toiva? W1GKE from Rockland, Massachusetts? Any old hams out there? Well, I cleaned out his ham shack, and some of these tubes were included in that ham shack. I got from Toiva either it was a 2 meter or a 10 meter. It was a transmitter that weighed easily 700 or 800 pounds, was 6 feet tall, crammed with all of the plug-in decks that those of you who are familiar with a high-powered vintage transmitter are familiar with. There was an antenna tuning deck. There was the high-power output deck. There was a driver deck. There was an exciter deck. There was a modulator deck, and there was a power supply deck. Each one of those getting successively heavier as you went down in the height of the cabinet, the 6-foot cabinet. So Toiva W1GKE built this thing, and I kept it as a monument to him, to the most extreme amateur radio building skills that I had ever seen. Now, of course, you see a lot more. You see silly stuff on the internet, like guys converting AM radio stations to ham radio, especially for the lower bands. But to get back to the tube itself, that is an image orthicon, extremely rare tube. It actually used a 3-inch by 3-inch or 2-inch by 2-inch image on a built-up mica substrate that faces the optical portion of the optical side of the tube. There were various signals applied to the connections that you see down below, including a high voltage section, obviously to generate electrons, and your electron, to steer the electrons. And then you had your electron gun, which produced the electrons, which were then, that is in the neck of the tube. It is a 5-pin socket with the electron gun. You can see it is degassed over the years, unfortunately, because these tubes are going for an arm and a leg nowadays. If any of you have one of these tubes, I would be happy to deal with you in obtaining it. To the left is I call it a Hofstrasse tube, all right, because it's huge. And I'm sure he has a radio.
Was that?
Go right ahead, please.
Oh, excuse me, about the CRT there. Was that used for radar possibly? They would project a map from the back?
No, that was standard broadcast television is what that.
Okay.
Now they may have used those for radar maps, because as I understand, the radar, at least the later ones that use CRTs, were of similar fabrication to a video cathode ray tube, in that you had a sweep, and that the signals were installed on a radar. Later radars was installed by sweep rather than what you would think is the sweep image. Somebody please tell me I'm wrong, because that's what I learned. And but I happen to know that is a broadcast band television tube, image orthicon, and they're very much sought after by TV collectors. The other tubes are high frequency output tubes. I couldn't tell you the megahertz, but the top ones. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the top ones were below the antique radio tubes are very high VHF, including the doorknob. There's a doorknob, there's an acorn, there's a lighthouse, there's a small acorn, and in the 7-pin tube that's about 1.5 inches long that you see is Toiva Johnsonen was his last name. So there's a TJ that it's got neon in the tube, and the TJ lights up when you excite 2 of the pins with 60 volts or more. That was his souvenir tube with his signature in it, or at least his letters, which I thought was a riot. I've kept it all these years. Any questions on the tubes?
This is cool. It's good stuff, Mark.
Thank you very much. It's my heart and desire. Next slide, please.
Well, more than your eyes can take in.
Yes. I'll start from the front and I'll work my way back. I'm going to start from the left-hand side because it's of lesser interest than everybody, I'm sure. Let me get a refreshed water. I shall be right back. Oh, I hurt my knee, so I'm not walking too well.
No problem. Take your time, Mark.
Oh. All right. I got my water. Give me that water. Oh, I'll be glad when that's fixed. Geez, I never knew the aches and pains you can come up with at 71 and still be relatively healthy.
Mm.
All right, let's get down to it. On the left-hand side is a very nice Olympus Zeus microscope. It's not old, it's 60s, 70s, but I actually have had a fascination since I was a kid with microscopes. It has far more to do with the machining and the optics of the microscope than it does the actual use of it. I do maintain a full set of slides for kids, but I've actually got microscopes that show up on the television set that I can use that are far more powerful. You can see it right behind it. If you look right behind the microscope there, that's a Jenna microscope. You look behind it and you will see a gray, light gray microscope. That is a research grade microscope, which has the finest machining of all in its various parts and pieces. Beautifully done. At the top, go ahead, please.
Let's say, was that that microscope? Did you say that that's a Zeiss?
It's either a Jenna or a Zeiss. I can't see you want to zoom in on it if we're curious?
See, we can see.
It's a Jenna. It's
Oh,
a Jenna.
yeah, I see it. Yep. I was curious because Zeiss still, at the time, was still considered some of the best optics you could get.
They still are. Throughout my career, I worked on gas lasers. I worked on helium neon lasers. I did a lot of optical work detecting various grades of microelectronic lasers. I'm sorry, observing microelectronic lasers. And I've got one of those. I'm so pleased. I actually worked on a test system that tested these microchip lasers that were coupled to fiber optics. And that was one of my jobs for 10 years. And I absolutely adored it. I miss my work. 2 jobs, both spanning 20 years, captivated me, including one that was 5 years. So I've had 3 extraordinary jobs in my life that were really fun, definitely fun. Up in the back there, that display that you see with the dark red is a colony display counter. And without seeing the rest of it, it just is a TV camera. You can see the TV camera up top. You put in a slide behind that black telephone panel, and you're actually able to, it fluoresces the bacteria in the Petri dish, so you can count the number of bacterium that are in your sample. And it's just with the camera and the optics and all that, I had to have it. It was a gift from where I worked. In front of it, you're going to see a small child's telephone operating panel. And the child's telephone operating panel, it's called a Zim phone. And I actually have several of these. These are toys that were manufactured during the 40s and 50s, specifically Zim phone, that actually worked. There were lights behind all 4 lighting positions up top. There are switches behind all 4 of the plugins. There are switches of 2 operation behind the levers down below. However, the red dial is non-functional, and the yellow dial, the yellow switch, is non-functional. They contain stuff kids can play with. But what it does is this thing has actually 5 phones. The phone that comes with the set itself, which you can see on the left, and you can purchase up to 4 other phones. I had this as a kid, and it would not work until you plugged in the proper extension to the proper number of the phone that you were trying to reach. In other words, they advertise on the box that it works like a real exchange. And guess what, folks? It's the only toy that I've seen that remotely resembles that claim. It
Ah.
actually does work kind of like a real telephone exchange. You couldn't get a conversation going until you plugged in. Of course, the plugs themselves were just dummies. There's no wiring going down those threads, those strings, but they still completed the circuit behind each consecutive plug-in. And I thought that was a hoot. I thought that was great. It's a toy that actually holds an interest in me because of my vintage toy
Sure.
enjoyment and also my vintage telephone collecting.
It's a great
So
shape.
there you have it. We've got 4 of those and I love them. Let's go right over to the collection that is right in, well, you can't see my cursor, so with the 2 tape drives, and let's focus right in on that whole thing front to back with the 2 tape drives. There you go. All right, up a little farther out.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Well, actually, stay there if you want. That's good. We go back to the other part. This is the first one anyway. What you see in front of you is the 1950s transmitter from a police station. That's what it came out of, and that's what I bought it as. If you look, there's a red handle with a cog underneath that, a gear, and underneath that is another cog that has what seems to be intermittent protuberances from the perimeter of the rim. In other words, it's got little titties on the outside of the thing. And what those are actuators. And you can see they actually turn in a definitive direction. And they have a solenoid next to them to make them work. So the call comes in from the call box. The call then goes to that wheel. That wheel then begins turning with a clockwork, and it sends out a Morse code-like signal to both the internal bell, which is on the left-hand side, and it also sends a signal out to the firehouse in case the firehouse had not been notified already. And at this point, this cog notifies where the fire is. So for every building that you had that was on the central alarm system, somewhere inside there was the mechanism that read where the fire is in terms of dots and dashes or bell rings. Now, this was equipped to ring a bell. I do have an enormous bell that comes to the firehouse that was equipped to also accept that signal in telegraph fashion. Now, if you move to the right, you'll see a wooden platform, my right. You'll see there's a telegraph key. You'll see there's a double pole dual throw switch, a meter, and 2 9-volt batteries. It takes 2 sets of batteries to run this system. The battery on the left is the local battery. That is the battery that actually sends out the pulses from the wheel that's on the left. You've got to have a battery or it's not going to work. These things have their own local batteries. I assume it was just easier to supply a local battery or a local power supply to the origin of signal. In this case, it's a police station. So the battery on the right is for the outside circuit. This is the one that goes outside to the world that does things like unlatch relays or produce signals for the telegraphic system, notifying where everybody where the fire was. So I made that to operate this system. It's a simple operator panel. The device on the right is the trigger. The J65 key serves as a start point. In other words, where the fire originates would close the circuit and set off the alarm. Now, if we can get the 2 back spools into focus in those devices as well, I'll show you the actual units. This is an 1885 Telegraph Ensemble, and on the left is a very simple clock wind. And boy, these clock winds lasted forever. The springs on them are 3 inches across on both of them. Well, I think the one on the right is a little smaller, but the spring winds guaranteed that these things would work for a long time. I suspect that would be the way I see them unwind over an hour. These things could bang away, making sure that the signal got through. So on the left, you have the winder. On the right, you have the reader punch. All right. I'm sorry. It is a simple punch. My apologies. It is glass encased. It is glass encased with cut glass. That's the way you can tell the older ones. The older ones also have the big brass badge that is right in front of there. And this is all Gamewell equipment, Gamewell. Oh, you can just see it on the plaque. But absolutely beautifully, meticulously fabricated. The gears are so precise. I wish I had a shot of the inside. Oh, you're right. Thank you, WO1N. Thank you very much. Glad to have you. So there was a series of punches that were run by Clockworks. And of course, I've got that vintage outboard motor stuck right in front of it.
Yeah.
But if you can imagine, you can just see the table where the tape goes in on the right-hand side from the spool, and the tape goes out towards the winder. It actually functions right to left. And there is a very precise set of flat-faced needles that stamp a 1/16 stamp out in the Morse code. You can just see the holes on the tape, and that is how you get your encoding. It's two holes. All right, now I'm going to sit back and see if there's any comments.
Oh, cool and unusual.
Yeah, it cost me dearly. It was in the hundreds of dollars from eBay. It's the only way that I have access to something like this. I just don't know a lot of telegraph collectors. The ones that I do know are from the radio shows or the ham radio shows, and they are hanging on to stuff like this for dear life, just like I am. But it is a functional telegraph system with both the transmitter and the receiver. The receiver being the 1800s Gamewell equipment in the back. The front piece, the transmitter, is also Gamewell, and that is driven entirely by the circuit panel, the battery panel that you see on the right-hand side. It's a working system.
Wow.
Any questions on the Gamewell 1800s telegraph?
Wow. First one I'll ever see in my life, I'm sure. One and only.
It's the first that most people have seen because they're just so rare. I call them unobtainable, but I have obtained one. Now I'm going to show you another unobtainable in this group. And to this, you're going to focus on the three-bladed propeller and get as close to that as you can.
I'm looking at that and say, wow, how unusual.
It is very unusual. It is also incredibly rare. All right, the picture that you see on the right-hand side is of a vintage aircraft model engine. It is a near exact replica of the same engine in same radial in a 100 plus horsepower version. It has very accurate connecting rods, push rods. It has a very accurate cylinder appearance. You can see it is a spark ignition 4-cycle engine. So yes, this is not glow plug, it is spark. It is from the 1940s. It is a Morton M5, M-O-R-T-O-N, M-N-F-5, M5. I'm sorry, I'm getting tired a little bit. And this is an engine that goes for hundreds or thousands of dollars on eBay. You can get a wrecked one for less than $1,000, but I think I paid over, and I hate to tell this, I think I paid over $2,000 for that motor or thereabouts, because again, it was a lifetime unobtainium. I had been collecting outboard spark ignition engines for many years, and this thing came up, and I hit up the bank account, and I hit up the finance committee. That would be my lovely wife of 45 years. She used the finance committee, and I was able to procure it. But you can see it is a true 5-cylinder radial 4-cycle engine, just like the real boys. The pistons look alike. The connecting rods look alike. The crankshaft has a master connecting rod with all the other 4 cylinders linking into it. There is a ring type, how do I want to express this? A ring type camshaft that operates the push rods, that is directly in line with those push rods that you see just underneath the rear case. And that is driven at half speed by the crankshaft. Actually, it's driven at a weird speed because it's ×5. It's divided into 5 intake and exhaust cycles for all 5 of the cylinders. The intake, the strokes being intake, compression, power stroke, and finally exhaust stroke. All of that was accomplished on this immensely complicated looking rotating cam gear on the back of the thing. You open it up and it is just again, I look for the machining, and the machining inside this thing is nothing like an average vintage antique motor of the same period. Very few cast services, a ton of machining, beautifully done and designed to last forever. And the only downfall they had is, while they had piston rings, they did have aluminum pistons. So the model airplane industry listed this as one of the defects of the engine. But as we all know, aluminum pistons were used in every high-speed model airplane engine from the 1920s on forward. They quickly found that the cast iron pistons were just so overstressful for a rotating engine that goes those RPMs, that even the inline aircraft engines went to aluminum pistons for lightness, and they proved to be entirely satisfactory for literally the life of the motor. So that's my Morton M5 from the early 40s, and I'm very proud of it.
Wow, that's amazing. Wow, that's really neat. How fun.
It's a cool engine. All right, who's falling asleep? I see some downed eyelids there.
Well, let's see.
Yeah, you. Yeah, you. I'm looking at you.
I think, well, let's see. I mean, I think, let me just see. I forgot how many, let me just check to see how many pictures we have left here. Because, whoops, sorry about that. Oh, that's actually, we have 2 left.
2 guys left?
I'm too
Oh,
timing.
pictures.
There's an
All right,
auction
okay.
going.
Actually, 3 left.
All right.
Well, I'll
That's
leave-
all right.
well,
Do
sorry.
you want to save them? What time is it?
Well, it's 9 o'clock.
Holy shit. Didn't you have to say you had to leave at 8 or something?
Not me, that was Paul.
Oh, that was Paul. Okay. All right.
He already took
Well,
off. Well, actually, what we could do is, Mark, we could actually hold these, and we have material. Plus, you could throw some more pictures for me in the future. We can pick up from here, and you can talk all about, because you have a great transistor radio collection, which there's a lot to discuss here. Because if I zoomed in, you could tell us a lot about these. Why don't we just plan on picking up? We'll schedule another meeting, probably, I don't know, when you're up for it. And we could continue on a following meeting, maybe in, I don't know, March, April, May, whatever works for you. Because you can always send me more pictures as well.
yes, I'm going to.
I think there's a ton, like I said, there's something for everybody in this place, because there's, this is remarkable, and this is just great. This is a lot of great stuff. And what we could do is, why don't we stop here, and I'll work with you to schedule another slot at your convenience, really, when you're up for it. I suspect the next meeting will be sort of NEVE 5 walkthrough, like the photos and discuss. So maybe, I don't know, whatever you're up for it. April. March,
April sounds fine. April sounds fine.
March.
How many viewers do we have left?
How many what?
Viewers? How many?
There's 3 left.
There's 3 left. Oh my God. Are you guys wonderful? Thank you. Thank you.
It's great, Mark. You did a great presentation. I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed just the eclectic, and we've covered the spectrum. If you want to talk about vintage electronics, this really covers it, because you're talking the whole spectrum.
I see 12 participants. Is that what you asked?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah, no, I think there's 12
12
people on still.
Oh, there's 12. All right.
Yeah.
And I'd like to say something at the close here. and then I'm going to hand this over to John or Carl, whoever wants to take it over. A collector is happiest when he's showing his collection. And I want to thank you all graciously for hanging in here. I hope I wasn't too boring.
No,
No? Okay, good. I'll accept from some comments from John via email on any improvements.
no, I
And
wouldn't.
I want to thank you very much.
No, this is great, Mike. We really appreciate it. I mean, like anything, you're giving us your time. So we thoroughly appreciate it as well, because, you know, there are things I know I can say for myself I've never seen before until now. So
Now you have a goal, John.
yeah, exactly. So, and I'm sure there's more when I'm sure when there's more photos, Mark, I'm sure we'll see more things we haven't seen before. Because I've never seen a bigger spectrum of vintage electronics under one roof until now. But yeah, so we definitely, if you're up for it, we would definitely like to have you back for as much as you can put up with us. So when we, I'll reach out to you personally over email. We'll figure out, we'll slot in a date to schedule for your next marathon.
At your convenience. And again, thank you, everybody.
It was awesome.
That was really great. Thank you.
I've got a lousy computer that doesn't enable me to even run pictures during Zoom. My computer, my computer can't walk and chew gum. So I want to thank John especially. He's been entirely instrumental in putting this together, and there's probably 500 or 600 more pictures behind those that I presented.
Oh, not at all. Hey, we got lots of Zoom.
Only 500 or 600.
Yeah, that's great, Mark. I'm all in, so we'll look ahead and figure out where we can slot you in, and many thanks for indulging us. That's for sure. And
You're very welcome.
What I'll do is I will wrap it up. And I guess I'll see hopefully some of you or many of you at the big show in March, because our next meeting will be after the show, and I'll figure out which date it will be. But anyway, I wish you guys safe travels, stay safe for the storm coming, and looking forward to talking to you and seeing you soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark. Wonderful stuff. Wonderful.
That was great.
Yeah. And by the way, the other way of seeing all this is to go to Mark's museum.
Oh, that's on the list.
Yeah.
Nothing better than being able to look right at it. But this is a treat. I think of it as a coming attraction.
Yeah.
All right.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks.
Be safe in the storm.
Yeah, you too.